As they stood in the quiet library where it had all begun, where a curious child had noticed strange markings that adults might have dismissed as damage, where a desperate mother had discovered hope in seeming disaster, where an ailing grandmother had recognized scientific brilliance in cryptic symbols, Melody felt the full circle of their journey. From the moment of purchasing a $457 house, out of sheer necessity, to creating a multi-million-dollar foundation that transformed lives around the world. They had traveled a path that no one could have predicted, but that somehow felt, in retrospect, almost inevitable. The Victorian creaked and settled around them, its century-old timbers now restored and strengthened, its hidden treasures now revealed and celebrated, its future secure for generations to come. Outside, the garden where they had gathered earlier now lay peaceful under the moonlight, the mathematical sculptures casting complex shadows that seemed to dance with deeper meaning. In the quiet of the night, Melody could almost imagine Margaret Winters walking these same rooms, carefully preserving her mentor's legacy while waiting patiently for the right moment and the right people to continue the work. Had she somehow known that someday a desperate mother, a curious child, and a brilliant grandmother would find their way to this house? Had she trusted that the universe would align circumstances to bring her hidden treasure into the hands of those who would recognize its true value? Perhaps such perfect alignment was simply what happened when people acted with courage and integrity across generations, creating patterns of meaning that extended far beyond what any individual could accomplish. Alone, Dr. Bernauer's brilliant insights, preserved through Margaret's dedication, recognized through Eleanor's knowledge, developed through Melody's leadership and Oliver's emerging genius, each link in the chain essential, each contribution magnifying the others. As Melody finally prepared for bed, she paused at Oliver's door, finding him asleep with a physics textbook still open beside him and a notebook filled with his own extensions of the Bernauer equations. The boy who had once explored a condemned house with childish enthusiasm had grown into a young man poised to carry these discoveries even further, adding his own insights to the ongoing legacy. Tomorrow would bring film crews and interviews, research meetings, and foundation business. But tonight, in the peaceful Victorian that had transformed from burden to blessing, Melody savored the quiet certainty that their $457 gamble had yielded returns beyond measure, not just in scientific breakthroughs and financial security, but in purpose, community, and the profound satisfaction of bringing hidden brilliance into the light. The house that had once seemed like their greatest challenge had become their greatest gift, a physical embodiment of the truth that value often hides where others fail to look, that courage creates possibilities invisible to fear, and that the most significant legacies are built not in single dramatic moments, but through patient dedication across generations of kindred spirits, separated by time but united in purpose. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Unlike the Hollywood film in development, which focused on the human drama, the documentary delved deeply into the scientific significance of the equations and their contemporary applications. "I'll greet them," Melody replied. "Would you check on Grandma and make sure she's not getting tired?" As Oliver moved toward Eleanor, Melody noticed the easy way he interacted with the gathered scientists, respectful but not intimidated, curious but not overwhelmed. The unexpected path their lives had taken had given him extraordinary educational opportunities, without separating him from his family or overwhelming him with pressure. He had developed a balanced perspective that combined scientific passion with humanistic values, a living embodiment of the bridge between disciplines that the foundation sought to build. The documentary crew set up their equipment on the lawn, where a holographic display would demonstrate the practical applications of Dr. Bernauer's theories in quantum computing, energy transmission, and medical imaging. The technology itself represented one of the Foundation's first commercial successes, a visualization system based on Bernauer principles that allowed complex multidimensional data to be represented in intuitively understandable three-dimensional projections. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the gathering, James appeared at Melody's side with glasses of champagne. "Almost time for your speech," he reminded her gently. "Nervous?" She smiled, accepting the glass. 5 years ago, I could barely speak about art history without notes. Now I'm explaining quantum physics to international audiences. Life takes unexpected turns. "The best kind of turns," he replied, his hand finding hers. Their relationship had developed with the same patient certainty that characterized everything about their unusual family enterprise. No dramatic declarations or whirlwind romance, but a steady building of connection and trust that had become an essential foundation for both of them. Eleanor's voice cut through the pleasant chatter of the gathering. "I believe it's time for the official program to begin," she announced, her authority undiminished by her physical condition. "My daughter has an announcement that many of you have been anticipating." The garden quieted as Melody moved to the small podium set up beneath the flowering dogwood. Looking out at the assembled faces, family, friends, colleagues, supporters, she felt a momentary wave of disbelief at the journey that had brought them here. 5 years ago, she began, my son Oliver and I stood in a condemned Victorian house that we could not possibly afford to restore, staring at strange markings on a wall that we could not possibly understand. We were a desperate single mother with a part-time coffee shop job, a curious 10-year-old boy, and an ailing grandmother in need of accessible housing. Today, we stand before you as the caretakers of a scientific legacy that is transforming our understanding of quantum physics and supporting a new generation of female scientists. She paused, gathering her thoughts. This transformation wasn't magic or mere luck. It was the culmination of courage and vision across generations, Dr. Bernauer's revolutionary insights, Margaret Winter's lifetime of protection and preservation, my mother Eleanor's ability to recognize scientific significance where others saw only strange markings, and even Oliver's natural curiosity that led him to investigate what adults might have overlooked. Melody gestured to the Victorian house that stood proudly behind the garden, its restored grandeur now housing not just their family but a working archive and research facility. This house, which once seemed like a burden we could not possibly bear, has become the physical embodiment of our Foundation's mission, preserving the past while building the future, honoring forgotten contributions while enabling new discoveries. She turned to the specific announcement they had gathered to hear. Today, I am honored to share that the Bernauer Winters Foundation is establishing a new program that extends our mission beyond the sciences. The Hidden Legacy Initiative will identify and support preservation efforts for the overlooked contributions of women across all fields: art, literature, music, philosophy, and more. Because Dr. Bernauer's story has taught us that brilliant work does not disappear when suppressed, it simply waits for the right moment and the right people to bring it into the light. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, particularly from the artists and humanists in attendance, who had sometimes felt overshadowed by the Foundation's scientific focus. Melody had fought for this expansion, drawing on her art history background to argue that important female contributions remained hidden in many disciplines, not just the sciences. Additionally, she continued once the applause subsided, we are establishing the Eleanor Accessibility Fund, dedicated to ensuring that physical limitations never prevent brilliant minds from participating fully in intellectual endeavors. She glanced at her mother, whose eyes shone with emotion. Because we have learned that the true measure of ability has nothing to do with physical capacity and everything to do with vision, determination, and heart. The formal program continued with presentations from Dr. Chun on the latest research developments. Oliver demonstrating the educational applications of their visualization technology, and Hannah Bernauer Cohn sharing newly discovered family stories about her great-great-aunt. As darkness fell, the garden was illuminated by strings of lights that created a magical atmosphere for the conclusion of their celebration. Later, as the guests began to depart, Melody found herself alone on the Victorian's wide front porch with her mother. Eleanor had requested a moment of quiet reflection before retiring for the evening. "Did you ever imagine we would come this far?" Melody asked, gazing at the now beautiful home that had once seemed an impossible burden. Eleanor smiled, her face serene in the soft porch light. "I always knew you were capable of extraordinary things. But this," she gestured toward the house, the foundation, the community they had built, "this exceeded even my highest hopes. You didn't just find us a home, Melody. You created a legacy." "We created it together," Melody corrected gently. "Your scientific knowledge, Oliver's curiosity, even my art history background, every piece was necessary." Eleanor nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's the most beautiful part of this story. Not just what we discovered, but how each of us contributed exactly what was needed at exactly the right moment. The universe has a way of aligning talents with opportunities when we have the courage to take uncertain paths." As if summoned by their conversation, Oliver appeared in the doorway. At 15, he stood on the threshold between childhood and adulthood, his natural enthusiasm now tempered with growing wisdom. "James is looking for you, Mom. Something about the documentary producer wanting to discuss tomorrow's filming schedule." "I'll be right there," Melody replied, giving her mother's shoulder a gentle squeeze before rising. Eleanor reached out to catch her hand. "Remember when you thought purchasing this house was the biggest mistake of your life? When you were certain we had traded one impossible situation for another?" Melody laughed softly. "I was convinced we would end up homeless within 90 days, when we couldn't meet the city's repair requirements. Instead, you discovered that sometimes our greatest challenges conceal our greatest opportunities." Eleanor finished for her. "A lesson worth sharing, I think." Later that night, after the house had quieted and Oliver had finally been persuaded to sleep, despite his excitement about the next day's filming, Melody stood in the library, the room where their journey had begun. The hidden door to what had once been a secret chamber now opened into Eleanor's private sitting room, while the wall that had first revealed the mysterious symbols now displayed them proudly behind museum-quality glass. James found her there, contemplating the equations that had changed everything. "Penny for your thoughts," he offered, coming to stand beside her. "I was thinking about value," she replied. "How differently we measure it now than we did 5 years ago. This house that seemed worthless except for the land it stood on. These equations that looked like meaningless scratches to me but represented priceless knowledge to those who could understand them. Even my own skills, which I thought had become useless when I left academia, but turned out to be exactly what was needed for this unexpected role." He nodded, understanding immediately as he always did. Conventional measures of value miss the most important things, like the courage it took for a single mother to bet everything on a condemned house, or the brilliance of a woman developing revolutionary theories a century ahead of her time, or the dedication of another protecting that work for decades without recognition, or the vision of an architect who saw the beauty beneath decades of neglect, Melody added, turning toward him with a smile. "The house was always magnificent," James replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "It just needed someone who could see its potential and love it back to life." The Victorian creaked and settled around them, a century-old structure embracing its new purpose. In the library below, the hidden equations glowed softly under specialized lighting, their mathematical elegance finally revealed and appreciated after decades in darkness. Outside, a gentle rain began to fall on the restored roof, no longer a threat but a soothing reminder of security found in promises fulfilled. The $457 house had indeed contained a treasure, Beyond price, not just in the scientific breakthrough that had secured their financial future, but in the profound lesson it had taught them all, that sometimes the most valuable things in life are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the courage to look beyond surface appearances and the wisdom to recognize true worth when they find it. 5 years after discovering the hidden equations in their once condemned Victorian home, the Carter family gathered in the garden for a celebration that would have seemed impossible in those desperate early days. The backyard, once overgrown and neglected, had been transformed into a lush sanctuary with accessible pathways, winding between heirloom roses and mathematical sculptures, art pieces inspired by Dr. Bernauer's equations, created by a collective of female artists who had become fascinated with the intersection of science and aesthetics. Under a white canopy decorated with fairy lights, Eleanor Carter sat proudly in her specialized wheelchair, now equipped with cutting-edge assistive technology, developed using principles derived from the very equations they had discovered. Though still limited physically, the progression of her multiple sclerosis had been significantly slowed by experimental treatments funded by the foundation, allowing her to maintain her sharp mind and active participation in their shared enterprise. "Grandma, look who's here!" 15-year-old Oliver called, escorting Dr. Mei Chun through the garden gate. The renowned physicist, now a regular visitor to their home, carried a small package wrapped in silver paper. "Perfect timing," Eleanor greeted her, her speech clearer and stronger than it had been 5 years earlier. "We were just debating the practical applications of the phase transition theorem." Dr. Chun smiled, taking a seat beside her colleague. "And I bring news that will add fuel to that debate. The quantum satellite network has achieved 97% stability using the modified Bernauer-Carter protocols." This announcement drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled guests, a unique gathering of scientists, historians, artists, and local community members who had supported the family's journey. The Bernauer Winters Foundation had expanded beyond anyone's initial expectations, becoming a globally recognized institution at the forefront of quantum physics research, while maintaining its commitment to institution at the forefront of quantum physics research, while maintaining its commitment to globally recognizing its commitment to finching, supporting women in science, and preserving the legacy of forgotten female pioneers. Melody observed this scene with quiet satisfaction as she arranged a platter of refreshments. At 40, she had found her unexpected second career as foundation director deeply fulfilling. The art historian who had once feared her professional life was over had instead discovered that her cross-disciplinary background made her uniquely qualified to bridge the scientific, historical, and cultural aspects of their work. "Need a hand with that?" asked a warm voice behind her. James Barrett, the architectural preservation specialist who had overseen the Victorians' restoration, reached for the heavy tray. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Melody felt the now familiar flutter of connection that had surprised her when she least expected to find companionship. Their relationship had developed gradually over the 5 years since he had first walked through the dilapidated house, identifying which historical elements could be saved and which required reconstruction. What had begun as professional respect had deepened through countless cups of coffee shared over blueprints, late-night discussions about preserving the mathematical symbols while making the house livable, and his genuine interest in Oliver's increasingly sophisticated understanding of the Bernauer equations. "Thanks," she said, relinquishing the tray. "I still can't believe we're celebrating 5 years. Remember when the kitchen ceiling collapsed during that first winter?" James laughed, the crow's feet around his eyes deepening. "And we found another set of equations hidden in the plaster? That's when I realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary restoration project." He glanced around at the thriving community gathered in their garden. "Though I never imagined it would become all this." The occasion for today's gathering was threefold: the 5th anniversary of the Bernauer Winters Foundation, The publication of a groundbreaking paper extending Dr. Bernauer's theories into previously unexplored dimensions. And perhaps most surprisingly, the announcement of a feature film about their story, focusing on the parallel journeys of Elise Bernauer, Margaret Winters, and the Carter family. "Mom," Oliver called from across the garden. "Dr. Novak wants to show you something." Melody made her way through the guests to where Irina Novak, now 92 but still sharp-minded, sat beneath a flowering dogwood tree. The elderly physicist had become a beloved figure in their extended family, moving into the carriage house apartment 2 years earlier when living alone had become too difficult. Her presence had been a blessing for Eleanor, especially two scientific minds, sharing their final years in stimulating companionship rather than isolation. "Look what I found while organizing my old correspondence," Irina said, holding out a faded photograph. Margaret took this in 1973 during that conference in Chicago. The image showed a younger Irina and Margaret standing before a blackboard covered in equations that Melody now recognized as simplified versions of some they had discovered in the hidden room. Even then, decades before they had made their discovery, Margaret had been carefully introducing elements of Dr. Bernauer's work into the scientific community, preparing the ground for the eventual revelation. She was playing such a long game, Melody marveled, preserving the full breakthrough until humanity was ready for it, while subtly guiding research in the right direction. Margaret understood that some knowledge requires the right moment and the right inheritors. Irina replied, her accent more pronounced with age and emotion. She waited her entire life for that alignment. And she would be so proud of what you've accomplished, not just preserving Elise's work, but extending it, applying it, sharing it with a new generation of brilliant minds. A small commotion at the garden entrance drew their attention. Thomas Winters had arrived, accompanied by a slender woman in her 30s, whose features bore a striking resemblance to the photographs they had of Elise Bernauer. "Hannah made it," Thomas announced, guiding his companion through the gathering. "All the way from Vienna." Hannah Bernauer-Kohn, the great-grandniece of Dr. Elise Bernauer, had been located through the Foundation's historical research efforts 3 years earlier. A mathematician herself, though specializing in pure rather than applied mathematics, Hannah had been overwhelmed to discover her great-great-aunt's scientific legacy and had become an enthusiastic participant in their work, providing family documents and stories that added crucial, personal dimension to their understanding of Elise's life and work. "I brought something special," Hannah announced after greeting everyone. She carefully unwrapped a small package to reveal a tarnished silver pocket watch. "This belonged to Elise. It was the one possession my grandmother managed to keep when the family fled Europe. Look at the inscription." Melody accepted the delicate timepiece, opening it to reveal an engraving in German. "Time reveals what patience protects." The sentiment was so perfectly aligned with their story that she felt a shiver of connection across the decades. "It's her handwriting," Hannah confirmed. "And now we understand what she meant. She knew her work was ahead of its time, that it needed protection until the world was ready." As the celebration continued around them, Melody found herself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of women who had brought them to this moment. Dr. Elise Bernauer, developing revolutionary theories in an era when female scientists were systematically excluded from academic recognition. Margaret Winters, sacrificing personal comfort to preserve her mentor's legacy through decades of secrecy. Eleanor Carter, recognizing the significance of cryptic equations despite her physical limitations. And now Hannah, closing the circle by reconnecting the scientific breakthrough with the family that had originated it. Oliver appeared at her side, now taller than his mother, and showing signs of the man he would soon become. In the 5 years since their discovery, he had developed from a curious child into a mathematically gifted teenager whose understanding of the Bernauer equation sometimes surpassed that of established scientists. The Foundation had established a specialized educational program to nurture, his talents while ensuring he maintained normal social development. "The documentary crew just arrived," he reported, "and they brought the 3D visualization equipment to show how the equations predict multidimensional interactions." PBS had commissioned a documentary series about women in science, with the Bernauer-Winters discovery featured prominently in the opening episode. They had become both scientific treasure and artistic focal point. "It's perfect," Eleanor whispered, more easily now thanks to the specialized therapy the Foundation had been able to provide. A room of hidden brilliance, revealed at last. Oliver had thrown himself into the renovation process with characteristic enthusiasm, appointing himself historical preservation officer and ensuring that each contractor understood the significance of the seemingly decorative patterns throughout the house. His bedroom in the renovated attic space had been designed to his exact specifications, with built-in bookshelves for his growing collection of mathematics and physics, texts, gifts from Dr. Chen and other scientists who had become involved with the Foundation. The formal announcement of their discovery came 6 months after they had first entered the condemned Victorian. A prestigious scientific journal published a special issue dedicated to the Bernauer Archives, Revolutionary Quantum Theory Preserved Through Persecution, with articles by Dr. Chen, Dr. Novak, and other prominent physicists analyzing the implications of Dr. Bernauer's work. Accompanying historical pieces detailed the challenges faced by women scientists in the early 20th century and the extraordinary story of Margaret Winter's decades-long mission to preserve her mentor's legacy. Media coverage was immediate and extensive. Melody found herself fielding interview requests from scientific publications, historical societies, and major news outlets. Oliver, to his delight, was featured in a children's Science magazine article titled "The Boy Who Found Hidden Math," complete with photograph of him proudly displaying his house map beside Dr. Chen. Eleanor's health stabilized with access to experimental treatments funded by the Foundation, allowing her to participate in selected Foundation events from the comfort of her room. Though her physical abilities remained limited, her intellectual engagement flourished as visiting scientists sought her insights on applying Dr. Bernauer's theories to contemporary problems. "You've created something remarkable," she told Melody one evening as they watched fireflies dance in the restored Victorian garden. "Not just preservation, continuation." Indeed, the Bernauer-Winters Foundation had evolved beyond mere historical preservation. Under Dr. Chun's guidance, a new generation of female physicists had begun extending Dr. Bernauer's work, developing applications that the original theorist could never have imagined. The Victorian had become a unique hybrid, part family home, part historical archive, part cutting-edge research center, with visiting scientists often working in the converted carriage house that now served as a state-of-the-art laboratory. 9 months after their initial discovery, on a crisp autumn evening, the Foundation hosted its first formal reception. The Victorian, now fully restored to its 19th century grandeur while incorporating 21st century accessibility and technology, welcomed scientists, historians, and supporters from across the country. Eleanor, dressed elegantly in a silk blouse that matched her eyes, presided over the gathering from her specialized wheelchair, engaged in animated conversation with a Nobel laureate who had traveled from Stockholm, specifically to view Dr. Bernauer's original equations. Oliver, permitted to stay up well past his bedtime, conducted tours of the discovery locations throughout the house, his narration growing more dramatic with each retelling. Melody, watching this transformation from the bottom of the grand staircase, felt a profound sense of completion. The desperate gamble that had led her to purchase a condemned house for $457 had not only secured her family's future, but had righted a historical wrong, bringing long overdue recognition to brilliant women whose contributions might otherwise have remained hidden forever. As guests mingled in the restored parlor, a young woman approached Melody, a first-year graduate student in physics who had received one of the Foundation's inaugural scholarships. "I just wanted to thank you," she said earnestly. "Not just for the financial support, but for what you've done for women in science. Growing up, I never saw many female role models in physics. Now we have Dr. Bernauer, Ms. Winters, your mother, and you showing different ways that women can contribute to scientific advancement." "Me?" Melody questioned, surprised to be included in this distinguished list. "I'm an art historian, not a scientist." "But you recognize the value of what you found," the student insisted. "You ensured it wasn't just preserved in a museum archive, but actively developed and extended. That kind of interdisciplinary appreciation is just as important as the original discovery." Later, as the reception wound down and the last guest departed, Melody found herself alone in the library with her mother. Eleanor had insisted on staying up to savor the evening despite her fatigue. "I never imagined ending my days in the middle of scientific revolution," Eleanor mused, gazing at the equations that had transformed their lives. "From a sterile nursing home to this. I never imagined becoming the director of a physics foundation," Melody replied with a smile. "Life takes unexpected turns. The best adventures often begin with desperate choices," Eleanor observed, echoing words Margaret had written in her journal. "Your courage brought us here." Melody considered this. Had it been courage that drove her to bid on a condemned Victorian, or merely desperation? Perhaps the line between the two was thinner than she'd realized. Sometimes the most courageous acts emerge not from confidence, but from the determination to find a way forward when all conventional paths seemed closed. As if reading her thoughts, Eleanor added, "You didn't just find a house or treasure. You found your purpose." This struck Melody as profoundly true. The academic career she had reluctantly abandoned had been satisfying, but ultimately narrow, analyzing and cataloging the creative works of others. Now she was actively participating in the creation of knowledge, bridging disciplines and generations, ensuring that brilliant minds separated by time could nonetheless collaborate in advancing human understanding. A soft knock at the door interrupted their reflection. Oliver stood there in pajamas, his hair damp from his shower. "Dr. Chun is calling from California," he announced. "She says it's important." Melody accepted the video call in the library so Eleanor could participate. Dr. Chun's face appeared on the screen, her expression animated with excitement, despite the late hour in Stanford. "We've done it," she announced without preamble. "Using Bernauer's approach to quantum field manipulation, my team has achieved stable entanglement across previously impossible distances. The commercial applications alone are staggering, but the theoretical implications—" She paused, visibly emotional. "This validates everything Elise Bernauer proposed nearly a century ago. Her name will be associated with one of the most significant breakthroughs in modern physics." As Dr. Chun detailed the technical aspects of the achievement, Melody observed her mother's and son's reactions, Eleanor nodding with deep satisfaction, Oliver absorbing concepts far beyond typical fourth-grade comprehension. 3 generations of her family, connected to a scientific legacy that spanned a century, now participating in its culmination. After ending the call amid congratulations and plans for a formal announcement, Oliver lingered in the doorway. "Mom," he asked tentatively, "do you think Ms. Winters knew we would find her secret? Like, did she pick us somehow?" Melody considered the extraordinary chain of events that had led them to this moment: her mother's illness, her own career change, the desperate search for affordable housing, the tax foreclosure auction where she had impulsively bid on a property she couldn't afford to renovate. Coincidence? Or something more profound? "I think," she answered carefully, "that when you protect something of true value with dedication and love, The universe sometimes conspires to ensure it reaches exactly the right hands at exactly the right moment. Oliver nodded, satisfied with this explanation. I'm glad we were the right hands. As she tucked him into bed in his attic bedroom, beneath glow-in-the-dark stars arranged in the pattern of Dr. Bernauer's most revolutionary equation, Melody reflected on the transformative power of hidden legacies, not just the scientific breakthrough they had discovered, but the legacy of courage, perseverance, and principle demonstrated by the women whose path they now followed. From Elise Bernauer, who had continued her revolutionary work even as the world darkened around her in pre-war Vienna, to Margaret Winters, who had protected that brilliance through decades of solitary dedication, to Eleanor, who had recognized the significance of cryptic equations despite her physical limitations, to Melody herself, who had risked everything on a condemned house that others had dismissed as worthless. Each had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges with determination and vision. And now Oliver was absorbing this legacy, learning that the most valuable discoveries often lay hidden beneath unpromising surfaces, waiting for someone curious enough to investigate, brave enough to persevere, and wise enough to recognize true worth when conventional measures of value failed. Pushing these thoughts aside, she brought the coffee tray into the library, which had become their de facto headquarters. The scientists had already assembled the complete collection from the hidden room, arranging the papers chronologically based on Dr. Bernauer's notation system. These are unquestionably authentic, Dr. Chun declared, handling a yellowed manuscript with reverential care. The mathematical approaches align perfectly with what we know of early 20th century physics, yet the conclusions leap decades ahead. Some concepts here weren't discovered until the 1970s, and others still elude contemporary theorists. Margaret told me once that Elise had perceived mathematical patterns that allowed her to sidestep certain theoretical roadblocks. Irena added. She described it as seeing around corners where others only see the wall. Over the next several hours, the two scientists became increasingly animated, occasionally lapsing into technical discussions so specialized that Melody could only understand fragments. Oliver, surprisingly, followed more of the conversation than his mother, his natural affinity for patterns allowing him to grasp concepts intuitively that Melody struggled to comprehend. By late afternoon, Dr. Chun had reached a decisive conclusion. These papers represent one of the most significant scientific discoveries of the 21st century hidden since the mid-20th. With proper development, Dr. Bernauer's approach to quantum field manipulation could revolutionize everything from computing to energy production. She looked directly at Melody. The question now is how to proceed in a way that honors Margaret Winters' wishes while ensuring this knowledge benefits humanity. Melody had been considering this question extensively. I believe we need a multifaceted approach, she proposed. First, academic recognition, proper attribution through publication of Dr. Bernauer's original work with historical context. Second, practical application, controlled licensing of the most immediately applicable concepts to fund further research and our family's needs. And third, preservation, creating a permanent archive and research center, possibly right here in this house. Dr. Chun nodded approvingly. Ambitious but appropriate to the significance of the discovery. I can facilitate the academic component through my connections at Stanford and MIT. For the licensing aspect, I suggest engaging specialized intellectual property attorneys who understand both the scientific and commercial implications. And I can provide historical context, Irena offered. Not just about Margaret and Elise, but about the broader challenges faced by women scientists of their era. Their story deserves to be known alongside their discoveries. The plan quickly gained momentum. Dr. Chun made numerous calls to colleagues, carefully describing the discovery without revealing specific details that might compromise their control of the intellectual property. By evening, She had secured tentative interest from 3 major research universities and a preliminary consultation with Stanford's Technology Licensing Office. Irena, meanwhile, located her archived correspondence with Margaret Winters, providing valuable documentation of their 40-year professional relationship and indirect references to the hidden research. These letters would help establish provenance and historical context. That evening, as they shared dinner at Melody's apartment, the first time in years that Eleanor had enjoyed the stimulation of a scientific gathering, the atmosphere was charged with possibility. Eleanor, energized by the intellectual engagement, managed her most extended conversation in months, directing questions about specific equations that demonstrated her remarkable comprehension despite her limited exposure to the materials. The symmetrical approach to entanglement. Brilliant, she stated with careful precision. Applications beyond current limitations. Dr. Chun leaned forward, engaged. Exactly. The current quantum computing architecture hits a scaling wall precisely where Bernauer's equations offer an alternative pathway. You see it immediately, Eleanor. As the scientists continued their animated discussion, Melody observed Oliver watching his grandmother with newfound appreciation. He had always known she was ill. Now he was discovering she was also extraordinary. The pride on his face as he witnessed others valuing her intellect brought tears to Melody's eyes. Later, after the guests had returned to their hotel and Oliver was asleep, Melody sat beside her mother's bed, holding her increasingly frail hand. "I never thought I'd see you in your element again," she admitted softly. "You were always so much more than your illness." Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand weakly. "You gave me this gift, sacrificed your career, your life." "Not sacrificed, Mom, just redirected." Melody realized as she said it that she truly believed this now. "Everything I learned as an art historian, authentication, provenance, historical context, it's all proving valuable for preserving Dr. Bernauer's legacy. Nothing has been wasted." The next morning brought another unexpected development. Bill Monroe arrived at the Victorian earlier than scheduled, accompanied by a slender man in his 60s with weathered features and keen eyes. "Melody, this is Thomas Winters," Bill introduced them. "Margaret's nephew. He's been trying to locate you since hearing the house had sold." Melody froze, her mind racing through potential complications. If Margaret had living relatives, could their discovery be challenged? Would the family have claims to the intellectual property? Thomas seemed to read her concern. "Please don't worry," he said gently. "I'm not here to cause problems. Quite the opposite. Aunt Margaret and I corresponded regularly, though I live in Colorado and rarely visited. In her final years, she mentioned that she had preserved something important and that someday the right person would discover it." He smiled warmly. "From what Bill tells me about your plans for the house, I believe she would consider you that person." Relieved, Melody invited him inside, where Dr. Chun and Irena were already at work cataloging the papers. After introductions and a brief explanation of their discovery, Thomas revealed his own contribution, a small fireproof box containing Margaret's personal effects that had been sent to him after her death. "I never opened it," he explained. The accompanying letter instructed that it should only be opened by the person who found Elise's legacy. "I believe that's you." With trembling hands, Melody accepted the box. Inside lay a small collection of items, a ring bearing the crest of the University of Vienna, a tarnished silver locket containing a portrait of a young woman with intelligent eyes, and a handwritten will dated just 3 months before Margaret's death. The will was extraordinary. As if anticipating exactly what had transpired, Margaret had legally designated the finder of Elise Bernauer's scientific archive as the rightful heir to both the physical materials and any intellectual property derived from them. The document had been properly executed and notarized, with Thomas named as executor. Aunt Margaret was always methodical, Thomas explained with obvious affection. She told me once that she had arranged for the right person to find her treasure when the time was right. I thought she was becoming confused in her old age, but clearly she knew exactly what she was doing. This legal clarity accelerated their plans dramatically. With Thomas's blessing and Dr. Chian's academic connections, they established a formal framework, the Bernauer Winters Foundation for Women in Physics. With Melody as director, Dr. Chun and Dr. Novak as scientific advisors, and Thomas as family representative, the foundation would own the intellectual property, directing licensing revenues to three primary purposes: preservation of the historical materials, scientific scholarships for women, and a trust for the Carter family's needs. Within 3 weeks, the first licensing agreement was signed with a major technology company eager to apply Dr. Bernauer's mathematical approach to their quantum computing research. The initial payment, 7 figures with substantial royalties guaranteed, was enough to completely renovate the Victorian, establish Eleanor's Care Trust, and launch the Foundation's scholarship program. Construction crews descended on the property, guided by preservation specialists who ensure that all architectural elements with hidden equations were carefully protected. The library, with its secret room, would become both Eleanor's comfortable bedroom and a small museum displaying selected items from the collection, while the remainder would be preserved in a purpose-built archive room with proper climate control and security. The most emotional moment came when they were finally able to move Eleanor into her new home. The library had been transformed, its intricate woodwork restored to gleaming beauty, its windows replaced with energy-efficient reproductions of the original stained glass, and its floors leveled and reinforced to accommodate her mobility equipment. The hidden room behind the bookcase was now an elegant, accessible bathroom, designed to provide independence while preserving the historical significance of the space. As the medical transport team settled Eleanor into her new surroundings, Melody watched her mother's eyes travel to the carefully preserved geometric equations, now prominently displayed beneath conservation glass on one wall. When I heard someone had finally purchased her home, I wanted to see who would take on such a challenge. "I'm Melody Carter," she introduced herself, extending her hand. "This is Bill Monroe, who's helping me restore the house for my family, including my mother who has MS. "Irina Novak," the woman replied, her handshake surprisingly firm for her apparent age. "I taught physics while Margaret taught mathematics. We were often the only women in faculty meetings." She smiled wistfully. Margaret was intensely private about her home. In 40 years of friendship, she invited me here exactly twice. Melody felt a prickle of intuition. "Would you like to come inside? We're in the midst of clearing out, but I'd welcome any stories you might share about the previous owner." Ms. Novak accepted with visible emotion, following them into the house with reverent steps. In the library, she stopped abruptly, her gaze drawn to the partially exposed wall where Oliver had first discovered the geometric markings. "She kept them," she whispered, almost to herself. "After all these years." Melody exchanged a meaningful glance with Bill, who tactfully excused himself to measure the kitchen for cabinet replacements, leaving the two women alone. "Ms. Novak," Melody began carefully, "did you know about Margaret's past? About Dr. Bernauer?" The elderly physicist's eyes widened in shock. "How could you possibly know about Elise?" Then her gaze darted to the bookcase, which they had returned to its closed position, but not fully secured. "Unless..." She approached the shelving unit with certainty, her fingers finding the hidden latch mechanism without hesitation. "She showed you her secret." "Not exactly," Melody admitted, explaining their accidental discovery. "We found her letter and the collection she protected. My mother, a retired chemist, recognized the significance of some equations." Irina Novak sank into a dusty armchair, overcome with emotion. "I always suspected she had preserved more of Elise's work than she admitted." Margaret would occasionally propose theoretical concepts, so brilliant yet so fully formed that I knew they couldn't be entirely her own creations. She looked up at Melody with intensity. "You understand what you've found? The importance of it?" "We're beginning to," Melody confirmed. "A respected physicist is coming next week to authenticate the papers. But I'm committed to honoring Margaret's wishes, ensuring both women receive proper recognition." "Then she chose her house's heir wisely, even if unknowingly," Urana declared. "Margaret lived in constant fear that the wrong people would discover her secret. In our early friendship, during the McCarthy era, she worried about being labeled a communist sympathizer because of her European background and revolutionary ideas. Later, she feared corporate interests would exploit Elisa's work without attribution. She gestured around the deteriorating room. She let this place fall into disrepair deliberately. Who would suspect such a treasure was hidden in a crumbling old house? This revelation cast the Victorians' condition in an entirely new light. What Melody had seen as neglect had actually been a sophisticated form of protection, Margaret sacrificing material comfort to preserve something far more valuable. "I have decades of context that might help scholars fully understand the collection," Irena continued, energy returning to her voice. "Margaret and I spoke in theoretical terms. Of course, she never explicitly confirmed what she was protecting, but I might recognize connections between her later work and these original papers." By the time Oliver returned from school, Melody and Irena had formed the beginning of a plan, one that would honor Margaret Winter's legacy while securing the Carter family's future. The elderly physicist's academic connections, combined with Dr. Chun's expertise and Melody's art history background in authentication and provenance, created a formidable team for introducing Dr. Bernauer's work to the world properly. Oliver burst into the library, freezing in surprise at the sight of their visitor. "Are you another scientist?" he asked bluntly. Irena laughed, delighted by his directness. "I am indeed. Dr. Novak, retired physicist and friend of the lady who used to live here. We found her secret math papers," Oliver informed her proudly. "My mom says they might change science." "They very well might," Irena agreed, her eyes twinkling. "And you played an important role in that discovery. Margaret would have appreciated your curiosity and observation skills." Oliver beamed at the praise, then turned to his mother. "Can I show Dr. Novak the symbols I found upstairs too?" "Upstairs?" Both women echoed simultaneously. "Yeah, behind the loose baseboard in the big bedroom. There's more of those triangle patterns, but these have little numbers inside them." Melody and Irena exchanged startled glances. "Show us," they said in unison. Following Oliver up the creaking staircase to the master bedroom, Melody marveled at how thoroughly the universe seemed to be validating their seemingly desperate decision to purchase this condemned house. What had begun as a last resort had revealed itself as something approaching destiny, connecting generations of women scientists, from Dr. Bernauer to Margaret Winters to Eleanor Carter, and now, potentially, to Oliver himself, whose natural affinity for patterns and codes might someday lead to his own scientific contributions. As they entered the dusty bedroom where Oliver eagerly showed them another set of hidden geometric markings, these indeed containing numerical notations, Melody felt a profound sense of purpose. They weren't just renovating a house. They were resurrecting a legacy, creating a home where hidden knowledge could finally emerge into the light, and where 3 generations could heal and grow together. The late afternoon sunlight slanted through the grimy windows, illuminating the complex geometric patterns that had waited decades to be rediscovered. In that golden moment, surrounded by the physical manifestation of one woman's dedication to preserving another's brilliant mind, Melody realized that the true value of their $457 purchase couldn't be measured in dollars or even in the potential scientific breakthroughs it might enable. Its worth lay in the connections it revealed between past and present, between sacrifice and fulfillment, between seemingly random chance and profound purpose. "Mom," Oliver whispered, his voice filled with wonder as Dr. Novak explained how these particular equations related to multidimensional mathematics. "I think we were supposed to find this house. Like it was waiting for us." Looking at her son's illuminated face and thinking of her mother who would soon have a dignified home for her final years, Melody could only agree. Some treasures weren't buried in the ground, but hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right people to recognize their true value. The arrival of Dr. Mei Chun the following week marked a turning point in the Carter family's journey. The renowned physicist arrived at Willowbrook's small regional airport with minimal luggage but maximum enthusiasm. Having cleared her schedule for a full week after reviewing the additional photographs Melody had sent of Oliver's upstairs discovery, the reunion between Dr. Chun and Eleanor was touching, two brilliant scientific minds communicating effortlessly, despite Eleanor's physical limitations. "Your mother was always the sharpest chemist I ever collaborated with," Dr. Chun told Melody as they drove to the Victorian. "Her ability to identify meaningful patterns is undiminished." At the house, Dr. Novak awaited them, having spent the intervening days meticulously documenting her memories of conversations with Margaret Winters that might provide context for the hidden equations. The introduction of the two scientists, one retired, one at the height of her career, created an immediate bond of mutual respect. "Irina Novak," Dr. Chun said with visible admiration, "I cited your work on quantum field asymmetry in my doctoral thesis. It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," Irina responded warmly. "Your recent paper on entanglement sustainability approaches problems Margaret and I discussed theoretically decades ago, though neither of us had the mathematical tools to resolve them at that time." Oliver observed this exchange with fascination, absorbing the interactions of these powerful intellectual women. Melody had arranged for him to miss school that day, believing the educational value of witnessing this historical scientific moment far outweighed a day of fourth-grade lessons. He had prepared meticulously, creating a detailed map of all the geometric symbols they'd discovered throughout the house, color-coded by location and complexity. "This is remarkably thorough work," Dr. Chun complimented him, examining his charts. "You have a natural talent for spatial organization. Have you considered a future in mathematics or physics?" Oliver beamed at the validation. "I like codes and puzzles. Mom says I got Grandma's brain but my dad's creativity." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Dad was a musician before he left. Mom doesn't talk about him much." Melody, overhearing as she prepared coffee in the kitchen, the only room with functional electricity thanks to Bill Monroe's preliminary work, felt a familiar pang. Jason's departure when Oliver was just 4 had left wounds that had barely begun to heal when Eleanor's diagnosis had created a new crisis. Her ex-husband now lived in Nashville, pursuing his songwriting career with occasional child support payments, but minimal presence in his son's life. With hope for a more enlightened future, Margaret Winters. Silence filled the dusty room as the weight of this unexpected responsibility settled over them. Melody carefully returned the letter to its envelope, her mind racing. If this was genuine, and her academic instincts suggested it was, they had stumbled upon something of potentially immense historical and scientific significance. "Mom," Oliver whispered, his initial disappointment transformed into awe, "we found actual hidden history." "We did," she agreed, carefully examining the other contents of the box. The documents were a mixture of formal scientific papers written in German and English, complex mathematical equations scrawled on everything from proper stationery to scraps of newspaper margins, and delicate technical drawings that resembled both artistic mandalas and advanced physics diagrams. Among these were personal photographs, a stern-looking woman with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, standing before a chalkboard covered in equations. A younger Margaret Winters receiving a diploma. The two women together in what appeared to be a university laboratory. The journal was perhaps the most poignant item, Margaret's careful handwriting, chronicling decades of solitary work, continuing her mentor's research, alongside personal reflections on her lonely exile and her hopes that someday the world would be ready for Dr. Bernauer's revolutionary ideas. These could be valuable to a museum or university, Melody mused aloud, her art historian's training automatically cataloging potential academic interests. Then a thought struck her with such force that she nearly dropped the journal. "Oliver, do you know what this means for us?" Her son looked confused. "That we have to donate old papers to a museum?" "No, well, yes, eventually. But first," she struggled to contain her excitement. "This is intellectual property. If these mathematical theories are as groundbreaking as Margaret believed, they could be incredibly valuable. Universities would compete for the rights to study them. We could negotiate conditions, ensure both women receive proper recognition, while securing funds for preserving this house and caring for Grandma." Oliver's eyes lit up as understanding dawned. "So we did find treasure." "A different kind than we expected," Melody confirmed, carefully returning the contents to the box. "But potentially far more valuable in the long run. We need to keep this safe while I consult some former colleagues who can help us verify the significance of these papers." That night, after securing the box in their apartment's small safe, originally purchased to protect Eleanor's medication from potential theft, Melody sat at her mother's bedside, describing their extraordinary discovery. Though Eleanor's condition had affected her speech, her mind remained sharp, and her eyes shone with academic excitement as Melody showed her photographs of the equations. "The symbols," Eleanor whispered with effort, pointing to one particular image. "Recognized. By physicist friend. Revolutionary." Melody leaned closer. "You recognize something in these equations?" Eleanor nodded slightly, her training as a research chemist allowing her to grasp concepts that were beyond Melody's art history background. She laboriously formed her next words. "Contact. Professor Chun, Stanford." The next morning, Melody called in sick to both her jobs, something she had never done before despite the exhausting demands of her dual work caregiver role. Some opportunities couldn't wait, and this felt like a pivotal moment for their family. While Oliver was at school, she carefully photographed each document, creating a digital archive before reaching out to Dr. May Chun, a prominent theoretical physicist whom Eleanor had collaborated with years ago. Dr. Chun's response to the emailed images was immediate. Video call request that Melody answered. From their apartment's small kitchen table. "Where did you find these?" The renowned physicist demanded without preamble, her normally composed demeanor visibly excited. "These equations, they're addressing quantum entanglement limitations in a way I've never seen, and they appear to be from the 1930s. Melody explained their discovery, careful to emphasize Margaret Winter's explicit wishes regarding attribution and recognition for Dr. Bernauer. "My mother recognized something significant in the formulas, which is why she suggested contacting you. Are they truly valuable?" Dr. Chun removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose as she gathered her thoughts. "Valuable doesn't begin to cover it. Ms. Carter, if these papers contain what I think they do, and I'll need to examine them personally to confirm, they represent a missing link in theoretical physics. Several contemporary theories struggle with the same problems Dr. Bernauer appears to have been addressing nearly a century ago. And her approach is elegant in a way modern attempts haven't achieved." Hope fluttered in Melody's chest. "So a university might be interested in acquiring them?" "Every major research institution in the world would compete for them," Dr. Chun confirmed. "But more importantly, several technology companies working on quantum computing would pay substantial sums for exclusive research access, even with attribution requirements. This could potentially revolutionize their development timelines." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Dr. Chun outlining potential approaches for authenticating and then leveraging the discovery. By the time they ended the call, with the physicist promising to fly out the following week to examine the original documents, Melody sat in stunned silence, contemplating the radical transformation of their circumstances. When she picked up Oliver from school that afternoon, she could barely contain her excitement. Dr. Chun thinks the papers could be worth a significant amount, she told him as they drove to the Victorian, where they had planned to continue clearing debris from Eleanor's future room. Enough to renovate the house properly and create a trust for Grandma's ongoing care. Oliver beamed, proud of his role in their discovery. I knew it was treasure. Different than gold, but still treasure. At the house they worked with renewed energy, the seemingly insurmountable renovation no longer appearing impossible. Melody found herself imagining Eleanor comfortably situated in the library-turned-bedroom. Sunlight streaming through restored windows onto the geometric symbols that would remain preserved as testimony to the remarkable women who had created them. As they cleared away decades of dust and neglect, Melody discovered something else unexpected. She was beginning to love this dilapidated Victorian with its secret passages and hidden history. What had started as a desperate financial gamble was transforming into a meaningful legacy they could preserve. "Mom, look what I found under this cabinet," Oliver called from across the room. He held up a faded photograph that had slipped behind a built-in drawer unit, a group portrait showing a much younger Margaret Winters standing with several students in front of Willowbrook College's mathematics department. Dated 1967, Melody examined it closely, noting the pride in Margaret's stance as she stood with her students. She was teaching all those years, passing on knowledge while protecting these revolutionary ideas until the world was ready for them. "Just like you gave up being a professor to take care of Grandma," Oliver observed, the innocence of a child making a simple connection. "You both sacrificed for something important." His words struck Melody profoundly. She had been viewing her career interruption as a loss, a derailment of her carefully planned academic trajectory. But perhaps it was something else entirely, a different kind of important work, preserving her mother's dignity just as Margaret had preserved her mentor's intellectual legacy. That evening, as they shared a simple dinner in their apartment, Melody found herself telling Eleanor about this revelation. Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to form words. "Never wanted to be burden." "You're not a burden, Mom," Melody assured her, clasping her thin hand. "You're my legacy, the reason I had opportunities you never did. Taking care of you isn't a sacrifice. It's an honor. And now, thanks to your brilliant mind recognizing the importance of those equations, we'll be able to create a home where all 3 generations of Carter women can thrive." Later that week, Melody met with Bill Monroe at the Victorian, showing him their discovery of the hidden room, though not revealing its contents, and explaining that funding for the renovation would soon be secured. The contractor walked through the house with new interest, pointing out original features that could be preserved alongside necessary modernizations. "This place was built with incredible craftsmanship," he noted, examining the hand-carved newel post on the main staircase. "They don't make them like this anymore. With proper restoration, this could be the showpiece of Willowbrook again and fully accessible for your mother." As they stood on the front porch, discussing timeline and priorities, Melody noticed a silver-haired woman walking slowly past the house, frequently glancing their way. On her third pass, Melody called out a friendly greeting. The woman hesitated, then approached the property. "Forgive my curiosity," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent Melody couldn't immediately place. "I knew Margaret Winters many years ago. We taught together at the college." "Very scientific. Let's see what we can discover." The Victorian looked even more forbidding in the fading afternoon light, its gabled roof and ornate trim casting complicated shadows across the overgrown yard. Inside, The musty scent of decades of neglect hung in the air. Melody made a mental note to bring fans next time to improve circulation. They headed straight for the library, where Oliver immediately began carefully peeling back more of the wallpaper around the area they'd examined yesterday. As more of the plaster was revealed, Melody's initial skepticism began to waver. The markings weren't random, they formed a distinct pattern, a series of interconnected lines and geometric shapes that seemed to radiate outward from a central point. "These aren't decorative," she murmured, her art historian's training kicking in. "They're deliberate. Possibly some kind of map or diagram." She traced the lines with her finger, noting how they intersected at precise angles. "This is mathematical." Oliver beamed, vindicated. "I told you." "And look," he said, pointing to a section of the pattern that formed what appeared to be an arrow. "It's pointing to that wall." He directed his flashlight toward the built-in bookshelves that covered the eastern wall of the room. Melody approached the shelving unit, which was empty save for a few moldering paperbacks and dusty glass figurines left behind when the house was abandoned. The craftsmanship was impressive despite the years of neglect. Solid oak, with intricate carvings along the top molding. As she examined it more closely, she noticed something odd about the dimensions. "This bookcase doesn't quite meet the wall on the right side," she observed. "There's about a 3-inch gap." Oliver was beside her instantly. "Secret passage," he exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Melody cautioned, though she couldn't deny a flutter of curiosity. Old houses settle. Nothing is perfectly square after 100 years. Nevertheless, she ran her hand along the edge of the bookcase, feeling for anything unusual. Near the third shelf, her fingers detected a slight indentation in the wood, almost invisible to the eye but distinct to the touch. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "There's something here," she whispered, pressing gently against the indentation. A soft click resonated through the quiet room, and the right side of the bookcase shifted slightly forward, revealing a narrow gap. Melody and Oliver exchanged astonished glances. "Mom," Oliver breathed, his voice barely audible, "it's a real secret door." With trembling hands, Melody pulled at the edge of the bookcase, which swung outward on hidden hinges, remarkably smooth despite decades of disuse. Behind it lay a narrow passage, no more than 3 feet wide, extending into darkness. The air that wafted out was strangely fresh, not stale as one would expect from a sealed space. "Stay here," Melody instructed, retrieving the flashlight from Oliver. "I need to make sure it's safe before we explore further." "But Mom," Oliver protested, "I'm the one who found the symbols." Melody fixed him with her professor's stare, the one that had quelled many an argumentative undergraduate. "Safety first, then adventure." Reluctantly, Oliver stepped back as Melody directed the flashlight beam into the passage. The walls were lined with smooth plaster, unmarked except for more of the geometric symbols they'd found in the library, these even more elaborate and precisely rendered. The passage extended about 15 feet before making a right-angle turn. "It looks stable," she reported, stepping cautiously into the narrow corridor. "The floor is solid, not rotted like some parts of the house." She moved forward slowly, one hand trailing along the wall for support, her heart pounding with a mixture of academic curiosity and maternal anxiety about what they might discover. As she rounded the corner, the flashlight beam revealed a small chamber, approximately 8 feet square, with a ceiling just high enough for her to stand comfortably. Unlike the passage, this room was not empty. In the center stood a simple wooden pedestal, and atop it rested an ornate wooden box, about the size of a large dictionary. Melody approached it cautiously, examining it without touching. The box was crafted from a rich, dark wood, possibly mahogany, with intricate inlaid designs in mother of pearl and what appeared to be silver. The craftsmanship was exquisite, reminiscent of Art Nouveau designs from the early 1900s. There was no visible lock, just a simple clasp holding it closed. "What did you find?" Oliver called from the library, his voice echoing slightly in the passage. "A box," Melody answered, her academic training urging caution while her precarious financial situation whispered of possibilities. "A very beautiful antique box." "Open it," came the immediate reply. Melody hesitated. If this was truly a hidden treasure, shouldn't they document everything properly? Contact authorities? But whose treasure would it be legally theirs as the property owners? The city who had sold them the foreclosed house, or the estate of Margaret Winters? And beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper, almost superstitious hesitation. What did the elaborate symbols mean? Why had someone gone to such lengths to conceal this room and its contents? Taking a deep breath, Melody carefully lifted the ornate box from its pedestal. It was surprisingly heavy, with a satisfying weight that suggested valuable contents. The fine craftsmanship became even more apparent as she examined it closely. The inlaid silver formed delicate Art Nouveau, floral patterns that swirled across the mahogany surface, punctuated by mother-of-pearl accents that caught the flashlight's beam and scattered it in iridescent rainbows. "Oliver, I'm bringing it out," she called, tucking the flashlight under her arm to navigate the narrow passage while cradling the precious find. When she emerged into the library, her son's eyes widened to perfect circles. "It's like something from a museum," he exclaimed, reaching out to touch the intricate inlay before pulling his hand back respectfully. "Do you think there's treasure inside?" Melody placed the box carefully on the dusty floor between them, kneeling to examine the clasp. "I don't know, but whatever's inside was important enough for someone to build a hidden room to protect it. Let's document everything before we open it." She pulled out her phone, taking photos of the box from every angle, capturing the detailed craftsmanship and unique patterns. Oliver fidgeted impatiently. "Mom, come on. The suspense is killing me." She smiled at his dramatic flair, another trait inherited from Eleanor, who had always approached life with theatrical enthusiasm. "All right, scientific documentation complete. Now for the moment of truth." With careful fingers, she released the silver clasp, which moved with surprising smoothness, as if regularly oiled and maintained despite its hidden location. The lid opened on silent hinges, revealing a treasure indeed, but not the gold coins or jewelry Oliver had clearly been anticipating. Instead, nestled in a custom-fitted velvet lining lay an extraordinary collection of documents, photographs, and a small leather-bound journal. On top rested a single envelope addressed in flowing script, "To the finder, please protect this legacy." Letters? Oliver couldn't hide his disappointment. "That's the big secret?" "Sometimes the most valuable treasures aren't monetary," Melody reminded him, gently lifting the envelope. The paper was high-quality linen stock, yellowed slightly with age but remarkably well preserved. She carefully opened it, revealing a letter dated April 17, 1943. "My dearest finder," she read aloud. "If you are reading this, you have discovered the legacy I have protected at great personal risk. My name is Margaret Winters, though I was born Margareta Winterstein before my family fled Vienna in 1938. Oliver leaned in closer. "Ms. Winters wrote this? The old lady who lived here before?" Melody nodded, continuing to read. "The documents in this collection represent the life's work of Dr. Elise Bernauer, a brilliant mathematician whose revolutionary theories on non-Euclidean geometry and its applications to quantum physics were decades ahead of her time. As a female scientist in the early 20th century, her work was dismissed, stolen by male colleagues, or deliberately suppressed. What remains in this box is all that survives of her extraordinary mind. I was her final student, and when the political situation in Europe became untenable for Jewish intellectuals like ourselves, she entrusted me with these papers before she was taken away." I escaped with nothing but this box and the clothes on my back, eventually finding sanctuary in this small American town, where no one knew my past or recognized the value of what I protected. The geometric symbols throughout this house are not merely decorative. They are fragments of Dr. Bernauer's most revolutionary theorem, one that she believed could eventually transform our understanding of spacetime and energy generation. I have preserved them in this way, hidden yet permanent, should the papers themselves ever be destroyed. I have lived a quiet life, teaching mathematics at the local college while secretly working to extend her theories. My own contributions are included in the journal. To whoever finds this collection, whether by accident or deliberate searching, entrust you with a scientific legacy that could change the world. Use it wisely, protect it fiercely, and ensure Dr. Bernauer's name takes its rightful place in history. One single mother's desperate purchase of a condemned $457 house would lead to a discovery so extraordinary that it transformed not only her family's future but revealed a forgotten treasure that experts had searched for over a century, hidden in plain sight by someone who understood its true value could never be measured in dollars. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cracked windows of the dilapidated Victorian as Melody Carter studied the property inspection report spread across the hood of her aging Honda. At 35, the former art history professor had traded her stable position at the university for a series of part-time jobs in small-town Willowbrook, hoping the move would allow her to care for her mother, Eleanor, whose progressive multiple sclerosis had worsened dramatically in the past 8 months. "Mom, I found another weird symbol." 10-year-old Oliver's excited voice echoed from inside the ramshackle house, his enthusiasm undimmed by the peeling wallpaper and water-stained ceiling surrounding him. Melody forced a smile despite the troubling assessment before her. The $457 tax foreclosure purchase that had seemed like their only option had revealed itself to be far more challenging than anticipated. The Victorian-era home on Magnolia Street needed at least $15,000 in essential repairs money she simply didn't have after draining her savings for her mother's specialized medical bed and accessibility modifications. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. "Coming, sweetheart," Melody called, tucking the discouraging report into her messenger bag. She entered the house, careful to avoid the rotting floorboard near the entrance that they'd marked with bright orange tape. The house had been built in 1892, according to county records, once the jewel of Willowbrook's historic district, before decades of neglect had reduced it to a condemned eyesore that the city was eager to offload to any buyer willing to take on its considerable problems. Oliver stood in what would eventually become Eleanor's first-floor bedroom, his curly brown hair catching the dust motes that danced in the shafts of late afternoon light. He pointed excitedly to a section of faded wallpaper that had begun to peel away from the plaster. "Look at these markings," he said, his passion for codes and symbols evident in his voice. "They don't match the wallpaper pattern." Melody approached, her academic curiosity momentarily overriding her financial anxiety. The markings were indeed unusual delicate lines etched directly into the plaster beneath the wallpaper, forming intricate geometric patterns that seemed deliberately placed. "That's strange," she murmured, gently pulling back more of the brittle paper to reveal additional markings. "This isn't random damage." The sound of tires on gravel announced the arrival of her mother's caretaker, Janine, who had been looking after Eleanor at their cramped apartment while Melody assessed their future home. Melody checked her watch. They'd been at the house longer than she'd planned. "We should head back," she said, ruffling Oliver's hair. "Grandma will be waiting for her dinner." As they stepped onto the sagging porch, Melody's phone rang. The screen displayed Bill Monroe, contractor, and her stomach tightened. She'd been waiting for his quote, though she already knew it would be beyond her means. "Hello, Bill," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady as Oliver scrambled into the car. "Melody, I've gone over everything, and I'm afraid the news isn't good." Bill's gravelly voice confirmed her fears. "The foundation issues alone will cost around $8,000, and that's before we address the electrical and plumbing problems. Frankly, I'm not sure this house is salvageable given your budget constraints." Melody closed her eyes, fighting back tears of frustration. When her mother's condition had deteriorated, requiring round-the-clock care, Melody had made the painful decision to leave her tenure-track position to move back to her hometown. The tax foreclosure auction had seemed like Providence, chance to provide her mother with a dignified living space in her final years rather than the sterile nursing home that would have consumed Eleanor's modest pension. "I appreciate your honesty, Bill," she replied, her mind racing through increasingly limited options. The apartment they currently shared was a third floor, walk-up impossible for Eleanor's wheelchair on days when the elevator inevitably broke down. But without substantial repairs, the Victorian would remain uninhabitable, and the city inspector had given them only 90 days to bring it up to code or face recondemnation. "Listen," Bill continued, his tone softening, "I know your situation. Let me talk to some of the other contractors in town. Maybe we can work something out, a payment plan, possibly some donated materials. This community looks after its own." Melody thanked him, but as she ended the call, the weight of responsibility pressed down on her shoulders. She had uprooted her son, abandoned her career, and now risked losing what little financial security they had left on a house that might never become habitable. The thought of failing her mother, the woman who had sacrificed everything to put Melody through graduate school as a single parent herself, was unbearable. That evening, after settling Eleanor into bed and helping Oliver with his math homework, Melody spread the house plans across their small kitchen table. The Victorian had once been grand, 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, formal dining and sitting rooms, and even a small library. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Winters, who had died without heirs, had lived there for over 60 years, though neighbors reported she had confined herself to just a few rooms in her later years as the house deteriorated around her. Melody traced her finger along the blueprint of what would become Eleanor's room, the former library on the first floor, with large windows facing the overgrown garden. The space would need significant modification to accommodate a hospital bed and mobility equipment, but its location and natural light made it ideal for someone who would spend most of their days indoors. It was in this room that Oliver had discovered the strange markings. "Mom?" Oliver appeared in the doorway, his Star Wars pajamas slightly too short at the ankles after his recent growth spurt. "I've been thinking about those symbols we found." Melody smiled tiredly. "What about them, buddy?" "They remind me of something I saw in that book from the library, the one about hidden treasures." He placed his tablet on the table, displaying an article about historical homesteads and concealed valuables. During Prohibition and the Depression, people sometimes hid their valuables inside the walls. What if Ms. Winters or someone before her did that? Melody gently stroked his hair, appreciating his imagination but unwilling to encourage false hope. "That's an interesting theory, but I think those markings were probably just decorative plastering that got covered up during renovations. Houses this old have many layers of history." Oliver's expression remained determined. "But what if there is something? It could help with Grandma's house. We could at least look." Melody glanced at the clock, nearly midnight, and she had an early shift at the coffee shop before returning to work on the house. "Tell you what," she conceded, "tomorrow after school we'll examine those markings more carefully. But no getting your hopes up, okay? Real life isn't usually like treasure hunt movies." After tucking Oliver in, Melody returned to the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of inexpensive wine. The reality of their situation was far from a heartwarming treasure hunt tale. She had less than $3,200 left in savings, mounting medical bills for Eleanor's treatments not covered by insurance, and now a property that threatened to become a money pit rather than a sanctuary. She opened her laptop, researching home renovation grants for historic properties and assistance programs for families caring for disabled relatives. There were options, but most involved long waiting periods or matching funds she didn't have. As midnight passed, Melody finally closed her computer, too exhausted to absorb more information, but too anxious to sleep. The next day dragged endlessly. Between serving lattes at Willowbrook Coffee and Books for the morning rush and cataloging inventory at the local museum during her afternoon shift, Melody's mind repeatedly returned to the Victorian. By the time she picked up Oliver from after-school science club, her determination had crystallized. They would find a way to make this work, they had to. "Ready to investigate those symbols, Detective Oliver?" she asked as he climbed into the car, his backpack bulging with books about codes and ciphers he'd checked out from the school library. His face lit up. "I brought tools," he announced, unzipping his backpack to reveal a flashlight, a small mirror, a magnifying glass, and a notebook filled with careful sketches of the symbols they'd seen yesterday. "And I did some research. If the markings are behind wallpaper, they're probably at least 50 years old, maybe older." Melody couldn't help smiling at his methodical approach, something he'd inherited from Eleanor, who had been a brilliant research chemist before her illness.